Hello, I'm Robert Yule, and this is the 13th in my series based on Genesis 1:26 about being a good steward of the world God has given us. Today, I'm going to share probably the most exciting idea that I stumbled across in my work in sustainability. It's about geothermal energy and how we can really be better stewards of what God has given us if we only run it when the sun doesn't shine. And so I'll be talking about that. But before we go there, I'd like to review what we talked about last week, which is the consequences of overspecifying and how, when we deal with that, good things can happen. So the first example is the compact fluorescent light bulb, the evil light bulb. This was an awful example of overspecifying. Rather than specifying a target for how much light we produce per kilowatt of energy, lumens per watt would be how we would measure that. The government decided to mandate the use of compact fluorescents so they could eliminate the incandescent light bulb. So they overspecified and they picked a solution rather than basically addressing the real issue, which is we just want to use less electricity. I'll give you an example of a very good metrics. It was put out by Lawrence Livermore Labs, who has a research center that works on these issues, and their target was to get lighting down to 1 watt per square foot. Kind of easy to remember. That was their target. It's kind of fun when I was working with them. I actually was one of their oversight committees. They bring in professionals to comment on various projects they're working on. I got to tour their facility and that was their target. And I said, "Hey, have you achieved that yet? That's a really great target." And they said, "Well, no, it's kind of a stretch goal. It's why we built one of the reasons we built the facility." And I said, "Well, that's interesting. I'm already at zero point 0.8 watts per square foot." And we had a nice chat about how we did that. I previously have shared that. That was the advanced lighting controls, where we discovered 85% of the light we were making was unnecessary. But anyways, back to compact fluorescents. What's wrong with them? Well, they contain mercury, which I don't care how you feel about global warming. Mercury is a significant health hazard. From the Mad Hatters who got crazy from using mercury and getting it absorbed, we don't reject it. It's an accumulative poison in us. And mercury poison is awful. It can cause lupus, liver failure, kidney failure. There's all sorts of problems with mercury. And that's just what it does to humans. It's really nasty stuff in the ecosystems. So it's just bad to have mercury in these things. I frankly think they're ugly. You may like that light bulb. I always thought it was just one of the worst things to stick into a lamp in the middle of your living room. They have a delayed start, which is annoying, and actually their life isn't very good. There was a lot of compromises made. The same reason why the delayed start is there. They were trying to squeeze it into the form factor of a light bulb, and it didn't fit very well. And so they have to make compromises on performance. And frankly, I didn't put it on the list. Most of these ended up in landfill, even though they had mercury. Fluorescent light bulbs are mostly used in the commercial industrial worlds, public buildings, that sort of thing. And so disposal of that was well managed. They were not thrown away. They were turned in as hazardous waste, and the mercury was properly dealt with. Compact fluorescence is, well, they tried, but frankly, most people just, hey, it doesn't work. They tossed it in the trash and it goes to landfill. And so we put a lot of mercury into our landfills. Not good. Water recycling. That was a little kind of fun example. In the factory I worked in, we use a lot of water to clean our product. This is very clean water. It's called deionized water or DI water. It's very pure. And basically, you have kind of a tank with some soap in it. We wash whatever it is we're cleaning in there, and then it goes into a series of tanks that are progressively cleaner. The last tank is actually where the water ends up. So the end of the line, clean water goes in, and then it overflows into the next dirtiest tank, the next dirtiest tank, depending on how many clean tanks you have, rinsing tanks. And then the final rinse water is thrown away. That's a lot of water we were throwing away. It's expensive to throw water away, especially in California. You actually pay more for sewer fee than you do to buy the water. And so we were wondering, is there a way we could recycle this water, use it for something else, reuse, that sort of thing? I had a really smart water engineer. He's a process engineer, really understood water management. And he worked on this, did all sorts of tests, sent off samples, worked with the suppliers, our processing equipment that produced the clean water. And he was stuck. It's really hard to get the soap out of the water. We we use the soap because soap likes being in water and it dissolves things into the water. That's why we use soap. And so it's really hard to get the soap back out. And so he came in one of our meetings once and he says, I solved it. I figured it out. And so they're really great. How are we going to get the soap out? And he says, we're not. I realize it doesn't matter. We pick the soap because it doesn't leave a residue on our products. Having trace amounts of soap in our pure water is not a problem. So I changed the specification, and he owned the specs, so he could do that. And so we discovered we had been over specifying. When we realized that, we just changed the spec. And so we then initiated this. And I should point out that the rinse water, excuse me, the DI water that we produced this way is cheaper from the rinse water. The rinse water was much cleaner than the city water. And so it's a lot easier to turn the rinse water back to pure water than it is to turn city water into pure water. And so it was cheaper, better, faster, all those wonderful things, higher quality. It was great. Just because we realized we were over-speccing the water. The last one is kind of the heart of what I wanted to talk about today. So this is the intro to it. It's called the duck curve. And there's a picture of it there. It does kind of look like a duck. The duck was superimposed in that, so you could see why. What this is in the state of California, as they put renewables online, primarily solar, but some wind, when the sun goes down, they aren't available anymore. And so the need for standby power keeps growing. And that's what these are graphs of. So in 2018, didn't move all that much. We didn't need to have a bunch of peaker plants that turned on late in the afternoon. 2024, we need a lot of peaker plants to turn on late in the afternoon so that we don't brown out or have rolling blackouts when people get home and turn on their air conditioning and TVs and laundry machines and stuff like that. So it's called a duck curve. It's a problem. One of the solutions is energy storage. So we're going to put a bunch of batteries out there and we'll discharge the batteries during late afternoon, early evenings to make up for the fact that the sun doesn't shine anymore. The wind stopped blowing. So that's the duck curve, and it's not getting any better due to renewables. And it's a real challenge in the world of clean energy generation is so much of our clean energy is what we call non-dispatchable. It shows up when it wants to show up. So what's the solution? Well, let's take a look at that. Oh, the overspecification. I was in a review meeting. I sat on a committee that watched a public utility purchase energy, and they were tasked to purchase peaker energy. And they had a whole bunch of bids they had received, and they were reviewing them with us. And there was one, they're covering the list of the ones they rejected. And one that they rejected was a geothermal plant that offered to convert their plant from running 24/7 to only running when they needed it. They were going to make it a standby plant. And they rejected it. And I said, why are we rejecting it? This is brilliant. This is a great idea. And they said, well, the specification is that it has to be less than 2 years old. And this plant's been around a decade. And so it's not qualified. Well, in this review committee, we have the people who specify that. The specifiers, the Public Utility Commission staff are there. And I says, you guys can give a waiver. Give them a waiver. This is a brilliant idea. And they all kind of looked at each other and said, nah, it ain't going to happen. We can't do that. And it has to do with the bureaucratic way the process is, you know. We're at the end of the process. You're asking us to go all the way back to the beginning and respec. We can't do that. That would just way delay everything. And so we didn't do this project. It really bothered me because it was a brilliant idea. So what was the brilliant idea? Why is this such a great idea? Well, there's lots of geothermal in the state of California. They have a gigawatt up in Northern California where I live. It's called the geysers. It produces dry steam, which is what you need to run a steam turbine. And gigawatt is a lot of power. That's a small nuclear power plant worth of energy. And they run those things 24/7 all the time. One of them had volunteered to only be in standby. The big problem with geothermal is you're limited by how much water there is, not how much heat. There's a lot of hot rock. The problem is water. Most of the water comes from rainfall, about 70%. They put about 30% more water back into the ground. That's either because they have some condensate after they've used the steam, it condenses back to water. And the local counties pump their wastewater up there and they pump that in the ground. And again, about 30% of their water is from this recharge. Most of it is, the rain. But they're limited on that. They can't make 2 gigawatts. There's not that much water. So that's all they can make is 1 gigawatt of a year of energy. Well, if we only ran the geothermal at night instead of all day long, we could get at least 3 times more energy peak. So they could be a 3 gigawatt generator for 8 hours or a 1 gigawatt generator for 24 hours. We need someone who would only run at night. So geothermal when the sun doesn't shine. Think of geothermal as this giant battery that charges itself. You don't even have to put electricity into it to get it to charge. We should operate it as that big dispatchable battery and only run it when you need it. So there's some pictures there just so you can see what you're looking at. That's an actual picture of a plant. You can see the excess steam. A lot of it gets evaporated in the air. That's not smoke. That's just steam, moisture that used to be in the ground is not going into the air. That's what the plants look like. They're pretty clean and not very big. And then there's kind of a schematic there of what it's all about. You got steam comes out of the well, runs through a turbine, makes electricity. What water doesn't disappear into the air, condenses, they pump it back in the ground, we add water to it, and it's that simple. Um, Very easy technology. There's nothing here that needed to be invented. Steam power has been around for, gosh, almost 200 years now. So well established. Like I said, this was a brilliant idea. Next week, I'll tell you what we did with it. Hope to see you then. And until then, as always, try and be a good steward of God's resources.